Is Mike? All right. Good evening. Tonight is Monday, November 28th, and I'm calling to order the Gahanna City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. The first thing on the agenda is to inquire if there are any additions or corrections to the agenda, and I do believe that we have one addition to tonight's agenda. Mrs. McGregor had asked that we discuss potentially a resolution for the football team. Okay. So,
For the Gahanna football team, right?
excuse me, yes, for the.
We're not going to talk about the other one.
Unless you want to do one for Michigan.
Oh. For the, excuse me, Gahanna Lincoln High School football team. All right, I think we can add that under Section C, items from council office, as the second item after Ordinance 73. All right, the first thing on the agenda is a presentation from the Coalition to End Tobacco Targeting. Tonight we are joined by Amanda Turner and Dr. Rob Crane from the Coalition to End Tobacco Targeting, and I will turn it over to you for a presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Vice President Bowers and President Renner, and Mayor Jedwin is not here yet, but thank you, Council, for having us for this brief moment to talk. We gave this talk about a month and a half ago to the Central Ohio Mayors and Managers Association. I don't know if Mayor Jedwin was there or not, but if so, she'll be bored. Briefly, we're going to talk about flavored tobacco issues. I'm a family doctor, former professor at Ohio State. I'm actually a resident of Dublin, but my children go to Academy, and I spent the last 15 years at sporting events here almost every night. I enjoy your remarkable city quite a bit. I'm also the president of the Preventing Tobacco Addiction Foundation and Tobacco 21. So I presented here in City Council a couple times before in the past. And tonight I'm really going to be an historian to talk about what you have done in the past and what we try to do this time. So briefly, those of you who are old enough may remember Rocky and Bullwinkle, all right? The most important contrivance of Rocky and Bullwinkle, in my opinion, was the Wayback Machine, in which Mr. Peabody would take his son back in time, this time back to Paul Revere's ride, to give sage advice to Paul about how he should proceed. We're not going back that far, we're going back to Gahanna in 2005. And this city council was presented with a very controversial issue. That issue was to allow secondhand smoke or not in all workplaces and bars and restaurants. I will tell you, you got a lot of phone calls and emails from both sides. But you looked at the science, you looked at the data, you looked at the risks of toxic secondhand smoke, and you took a stand. As did Columbus and a dozen surrounding suburbs, and said, no, we don't think this is a good idea. 1 year later, in 2006, the entire state took a vote trying to decide whether this should be going statewide or not. Reynolds Tobacco mounted a $5 million campaign. The citizens of Ohio overwhelmingly voted to take all of Ohio, using your language, smoke-free. Fast forward to 2016, City of Columbus and surrounding suburbs were posed the question. We have an epidemic of youth vaping and e-cigarette use that's overwhelming them. What do you think about raising the age limit for this most deadly and addictive disease from 18 to 21? Again, Central Ohio stood firm, said this is a good idea. There was a lot of controversy. The vape shop said, we will go out of business. We cannot handle this. But indeed, that's what happened. 1 year later, 18 months later, the state of Ohio entirely went to 21. And in 2019, the federal legislature and President Trump signed a law making all of the United States 21. But it was leadership in Central Ohio that kicked the ball off. And it's leadership we ask for you again. Before we get started, though, I wanted to introduce Amanda Turner, who's the Executive Director of the Preventing Tobacco Addiction Foundation, who's been leading the fight in Columbus to talk about what we're doing.
Thank you. I feel like I'm at karaoke night holding the microphone this way. That revealed a lot of information. So I am the show and tell portion of the evening, so I'm going to pass these to you to pass around. I find every time I talk about these products, a lot of people haven't really touched them, felt them, seen them, but more importantly, those stay with me. Those stay with me, Rob. Rob, those stay with me.
Want to go together?
Yeah, those stay with me. Yeah. So a lot of times folks have not seen these in person. So that stays with me. Thank you. I have lots of samples, lots of samples. So I'm here as the Executive Director of Preventing Tobacco Addiction Foundation, also a member of the coalition. But more importantly, I am also here as a mom, shamelessly always trying to show pictures of my kid. I live in Columbus, so I'm a Franklin County resident. I'm also the granddaughter of a tobacco farmer in South Carolina who died of lung cancer when I was 10. So it's safe to say I've always really disliked tobacco products. But as a mom to this adorable boy named George, I fear these products. This is a really innovative industry, and I just want you to see the products that are coming in front of you. Feel how light they are, smell them, because what we know in Ohio, 50% of high school students have tried e-cigarettes. That's what you have in front of you, also known as vaping. 30% of high school students use e-cigarettes, and what scares me the most is 12% of middle schoolers use e-cigarettes. That's 6th, 7th, 8th graders using e-cigarettes. And I don't know where I'm supposed to be pointing. There we go. And there was a research that showed there are more than 15,500 unique e-cigarette flavors. And right now I could probably name like 100 and they would be some sort of version of strawberry or ice. And then there's 250 unique cigar flavors. So what you also have in front of you they're called cigarillos. They're mini cigars. So you can't sell combustible cigarettes in flavors except menthol. But the loophole that was left that the tobacco industry figured out was they wrapped cigarettes with tobacco leaves, and they call them mini cigars. That you can get in flavors. So I don't know if you dared to open those packages, but they smell very sweet and flavor-filled. That is also part of what we're talking about here is those flavored products that are attracting kids. And I want to just kind of give you perspective of what we're talking about here. So this is a pack of cigarettes. This is 20 cigarettes. This is equivalent to about 200 puffs worth of nicotine.
I used to smoke that.
This is a breezy bar that I bought lemon mint for about $19 at a gas station. It advertises as 6,000 puffs. So if I'm doing my math correctly, this little device equals 30 of these with the nicotine content. And as you can see, I can hide it in my hand, I can put it in my pocket, and if I were to use it right now, it would smell like we were in Bath and Body Works. It would not smell like tobacco. So hopefully you got this sense of the products that you had in front of you. A lot of those have the same kind of equivalence of 4,000 puffs, 5,000 puffs. This is not a unique product. This is very standard to what kids are buying. What bothered me the most was when I purchased these is that I was given a free gift with purchase. So this product is 5% nicotine. This is 6% nicotine, and I was given this for free. This is marketing. This is a tactic. It's not because he had extra. This was an intentional thing to get me more hooked onto nicotine. Obviously, I don't use these, but to get me more hooked, to pull me in even stronger with the nicotine content. So as you can see, 81% of kids who have ever used a tobacco product start with flavors. And this is not by coincidence. This is by design. This is intentional. Flavors is what lures the kids in. This is what, we used to see candy in the aisles, candy right in front of the checkout station of gas station. This is one store, 3 areas of nicotine products. Those are all individual vape products, just like the ones that you saw. Again, that's where candy used to be. That was where we would have for kids to look at and want to ask their parents for. And again, 250 cigar flavors and counting: strawberry kiwi, tropical mist, cherry dynamite. And we're moving on. So flavors is what sets the hook. The nicotine content that is masked by these flavors is what really reels the kids in. And so what we're asking you today is to just really try to make sure that poison doesn't taste like peaches, and really examine what is out there in your market, what your kids are using.
So when we gave this presentation to CAMA, we were delighted to share the stage, who was also presenting, with Dr. Amy Adkins. You remember she was the physician who presented for Governor DeWine during the terrible early part of the COVID epidemic. A hero, in my opinion. What I think we have to keep in mind is during this terrible time of the COVID epidemic, more people died of smoking and tobacco than died of COVID. Think of the time, the effort, the money, the stress that we went under with COVID, and how little attention we pay to this other problem. The good news is over the last 20 years, through education, higher taxes, age 21, smoke-free, and indeed counter-marketing, where they showed those commercial, you have to pull a tooth out to buy a cigarette. We've really done a good job of persuading kids that smoking tobacco is gross. But we're up against one of the most innovative and well-funded industries in the world, and they've come back at us with this. Over the last 8 years, they have entirely reversed 20 years of progress. And so we're faced with an issue of epidemic proportions of kids using nicotine, which is addictive. What we know about these kids is they're about 4 times more likely to go on to Marlboros and Newports, to regular combustible cigarettes. Why? Because e-cigarettes, although very easy to start, they don't deliver quite the punch that a Marlboro or Newport combustible cigarette is, which hits your bloodstream in your brain within 6 seconds. Very much like OxyContin is easy to start, but heroin is where you end up. Vapes are where you start. Marlboro is where you end up. And all we're asking is that we consider taking the hook out, the flavors, before they get reeled in. So here's what Columbus is thinking about. Retailers would not be allowed to sell any flavored product. That's menthol cigarettes, flavored cigars, flavored vapes, flavored hookah. None of the flavors would be in. They can still sell all these products, they just have to take the candy out. Now, interestingly, we would not ban individual possession. So police are not going to arrest somebody for carrying a menthol cigarette or a vape, none of that. It's all done at the retail level. In your case, it would be done by Franklin County Health. You simply designate them the ability to go to a retailer and say, you must take these off the shelf, or you lose your license to provide tobacco products. Now, already, City of Dublin and Worthington and Columbus have a tobacco retail license, which enables the city to count how many retailers there are. I mean, the City of Columbus, there are 825. In Gahanna, I think you have 7. I'm not entirely sure. We'll have to look at that to be sure. But look at the number differential. It's tremendous. But the most important thing is this is done at the retail level through a tobacco retail license that you will grant to Franklin County Health to take care of this for you. And it'll be done as civil procedure. So we would send a person in to take a look. If they find something, they will get a letter as a warning, get a fine. If they keep on selling, they might get a suspension. Oops, let me go back here. I'm having trouble. These are the local supporters of this initiative. And I would invite upon you to look for find any major health group which is not supporting this initiative. This is everybody in town. These are the folks you know and trust. And nationally, look at this list of this proportion here. Almost every national group you can think of is on board behind getting rid of flavors. Now, one aspect of this which we brought up at a hearing recently in Columbus, a local reporter said this. It was playing very nicely before. Let's try that again. Huh. Where's it going to go?
There it is.
We are outside of a smoke shop in Upper Arlington. Even if that flavored tobacco ban goes into effect in Columbus, you'll still be able to buy the products that you want right here. And that's why small business owners in Columbus are concerned. They say that there'll still be a health crisis in Columbus because people will just cross the city limits to get the products they want. So I brought that question and concern today to city leaders.
The bottom line is that Columbus cannot act alone. If we do not act in concert, it simply doesn't work. And all the people who couldn't buy in Columbus will be coming to Gahanna to buy. So what are we asking of you? We're not asking of you to do anything right now except to talk with your own parents, your teachers, the resource officers, the people who deal with vaping in the schools every day, who find kids vaping in the bathroom, vaping in the English class, who find vapes around the school all the time, who find kids who are addicted to nicotine, and ask them what they think you should do. That's all. I think you can protect your kids with some very simple measures. We have representative language that we've supplied to you, I think already, that you may use to look at, that will be adopted throughout Franklin County, so it's very equivalent for Franklin County Health and City of Columbus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Crane and Amanda. Are you open to taking questions? Okay. Can I open the floor to questions from colleagues? Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
So this would limit the flavors totally, not just, I mean, would adults be able to buy the flavors?
No, this would be all flavors because unfortunately the ability to keep kids from using has not been worked out very well. When we sample in Columbus, for instance, where the health department does this, they find that about 30 to 40% of stores are selling to kids underage. Worse than that, older kids tend to buy for younger kids, adults tend to buy for older kids. It's hard to keep it out of the hands of kids. If you look at the kind of flavors they're offering, they're not intended for the adult Marlboro smoker. They're intended for kids.
Could you speak a little bit about current enforcement or regulation around tobacco purchasing, tobacco retail?
In the city of Gahanna?
No, regionally or statewide?
So as we mentioned, there is a tobacco retail license already in place with the city of Columbus. Gahanna does not have one in place, so your retailers are not being regulated locally. From the statewide level, they do compliance checks at random. It's under the responsibility of the the Ohio State Patrol, so they have bigger things they're working on, so they're not really checking retail shops. And the same with the FDA. I think they last year averaged, they checked 17% of all the retailers in the country. So retailers are getting checked maybe every 5 years if they get checked by the FDA. So the short answer is there is no real regulation happening right now with your tobacco retailers.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Padova?
So I've not been in the like the vape stores myself. If this were to go into effect, would that essentially put them out of business because then the people would just be going to gas stations, or would they have anything to offer at that point?
They would not be able to sell flavored e-cigarettes, and if that's the product that they choose to make their business on, then probably, but then, they could always switch their business model.
Can have a tobacco flavor or no flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the majority of those stores, I would assume,
If
are
it's a
the
vape-only
flavored?
shop, you could probably assume it's mostly flavors, because that's what
Okay.
pulls people in.
Okay.
Their argument is that people who are trying to switch from combustible Marlboros or Newports to vapes have to have flavors. And I think it stretches the imagination to think that somebody who's smoking a Marlboro has to have a strawberry mango vape to go to.
And the argument you'll hear too is it's a cessation tool. It's not. Cessation tool is used to get you off of a substance. It keeps you on. It keeps you on to nicotine. In Europe, they actually do use e-cigarettes as a cessation tool because it's 2% nicotine content. It's not at addictive levels. Here, the products I showed you are 5 and 6% nicotine. So they are trying to keep you hooked and hook more users, new users.
Having been a smoker, I'm embarrassed to say, leaving it 25 years ago, it's truly amazing how addictive it becomes and how difficult it is to stop. And I can say that if this is leading people to smoke, it just, you'll never get rid of it because it's going to be fun to have it. It's, tastes good or whatever. I remember, and I'm going to give a story. My husband and I both stopped. Both of us stopped, doing it, and all of a sudden, those little, like little, looks like a little cigar, but it was really thin, and it was a Newport thing, I think, as well, and we were in an airplane, and I said, oh my God, I really want to try that. And one puff, and I was smoking them. So it's, you can't, you got to make it to you're not going to ever do it again. Hardest thing I've ever done is to stop smoking. So I would say this is a wonderful thing probably to do. I wasn't sure what it was going to be when I came.
Nope.
And so this is an opportunity to say, and it's not going to stop people. People can still come in and get regular cigarettes if they're 21. And so, that's not going to stop that, but for kids, it's not good. Not good at all. And it leads to things that are going to be horrible for them.
Right,
so.
and studies show if you are a menthol smoker and you
Oh,
want
menthol.
to quit, you can switch to regular cigarettes and your chances of quitting are much easier because menthol, it's a cooling effect that they add to cigarettes.
And I'm going to tell you that as well. Menthol, I could never smoke a cigarette if it wasn't menthol because it tasted so bad. So it's kind of the same stuff, isn't it?
Yep.
There are 22 million smokers in the U.S. We are not going to get rid of them with this. This is a prevention effort to get our kids from not starting.
From
That's
keeping
where
them
we have
from
to go.
starting. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Crane and Ms. Turner, for being here. Could you just repeat the statistic on the middle school usage that you gave earlier?
In Ohio, it's 12% of middle schoolers are using e-cigarettes.
And I remember when I was going through Gahanna schools, every couple of years we would have to take like a blind survey of if we'd ever used any tobacco products or drugs or alcohol. And do they still do that, or do we have any sort of localized data available to us here?
there is the Ohio Youth Tobacco Survey, which they've been having trouble doing because of COVID, because kids weren't in school. They've done a recent one. Unfortunately, it was a send home. Rather than sitting in your class and have an anonymous survey, you send it home and the parents are looking over your shoulder. No one really relies on that data very much, which is why you saw me using 1999 data. But you can request that information on a local basis from the federal government. I don't know about a town the size of Gahanna, but I know Central Ohio and Franklin County can do that, if that would be helpful to you.
Thank you. That's very long.
Mr. Renner first.
Would you like to go?
No, good.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, and pardon me, I didn't do my own research, but I'm just asking, can any of these flavored products actually, flavored tobacco products, be purchased online?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
they can, unfortunately, and that's a really hard thing to regulate. So if you are an adult and you're using these products, you can still order them online. I didn't have a credit card when I was in grade school. I don't know how it is these days. My son will not have a credit card. But it would be really hard to purchase something like this on a credit card and have it delivered to your home if you are a teen. But adults would have access to it.
No, thank you for that. And, you know, any legislation, I mean, we're not going to go into the homes and regulate what happens in the home. Parents should actually take the responsibility and, you know, parent their child appropriately. So I really am enamored, and we spoke before, and I thank you for your time again for introducing to me the subject. The other part, and I want you to, so there's in my mind, there's two parts to this. There's this one about, there's this flavored tobacco stuff. And forgive me for, you know, a better word, but that's just sort of like the icing on the cake. Really, the bulk, I think, what you're talking about, what you introduced and what the model legislation is the licensing program with the County Board of Health. So Joe Mazzola is somebody, the health commissioner is somebody that I work with. And after we talked, I did talk to him a little bit and say, hey, you know, give me a 5-minute spiel about this. So I'd like you to actually talk about, you know, what the licensing program actually does for this. But my impression is it opens up a whole wider latitude for the control and the regulation of tobacco to make sure that these retailers are following the law. They're not selling to children any of the products, not just flavored, but any of the products and so forth. So can you just tag on and talk about that?
So in Ohio, you have to have a license, really a tax citation in order to sell products, just so they can collect the taxes. But you can't have that withdrawn for any bad behavior. So it's not a real license. If you want to own a dog, you have to have a dog license. You want to cut hair, you have to have a license. But if you want to sell the most deadly and addictive product in Gahanna, you don't have to have a license. So that's the first step, is to look at that. It allows you to enumerate the number of people who are selling in Gahanna. It also allows you to control that license. Is it licensee too close to a school? Is that licensee abusing the license by selling underage? Is that licensee selling flavored products or other contraband? It gives you the kind of tool you need to control a little bit the sale of these products.
And how the mechanics of it, so you have a fee that the retailers would pay. I think Franklin County, they're implementing this throughout the whole county. I think they've set the fee around $400 to $500 annually from each retailer. That funding goes to the agency you've designated, most likely Franklin County Health Department, to manage the program. So if it's done correctly, it's budget neutral. It does not cost the city anything, because your agency, Franklin County, would be the ones managing the program. So they would be collecting the fees. They would be sending out underage kids with an adult to do an underage buy. They would figure out the chain of custody. They would send out the warning letters. They would go through the penalty structure. They would hear the appeals. So this would all be happening at Franklin County Board of Health. And the reason we do it, that we recommend that as a best practice is this is a health issue. It's not a safety issue. So it's not something you need to engage the police in. They're also already in these establishments checking like hot dog temperatures and cleanliness and signage. So it's already like a space they're in that they're known for. So they'll also be checking for, tobacco 21 signage. If you do choose to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products, they would also make sure they're not selling those products on the shelf, and then they would also be testing them to make sure they're complying with the law. And it's not really to be a gotcha program, it's really to try to level the playing field, because there are good actors and there are some bad actors, and we need to make sure they're all being compliant with the law. And with the state, if they do catch somebody selling, they just penalize the clerk. The retailer has no skin in the game. And we've seen this, if you put the onus on the retailer, the business owner, to comply with the law, they will comply with the law. That is where behavior will change. They will make sure their clerks know to check for ID, and that's all we're saying, check for ID. That's it, just check the ID. And if you do that, great. If you don't, well, you're breaking the law.
The average convenience store in Ohio sells $650,000 worth of tobacco products every year. That's how big this industry is and how powerful they've been in opposing us.
And so if you threaten that revenue, by pulling their license, they will make changes. They will make sure they comply with the law. We saw this happen in Alaska, where it dropped from 30% of their retailers were violating down to 6%, because their first penalty was they pulled the license out for 20 days. We don't recommend that. We're fine with that, but that is, a good case study to show that it does work.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
So you just made me think of another question as you were talking about proximity to schools, because I know we have a vape store just kind of across the street almost from the school. Are there other cities who have parameters around that it can't be within a certain distance?
Yeah, a lot of them say 1,000 feet. A lot of times they'll grandfather in ones that are already existing, but saying any new licenses can't be within 1,000 feet of a school or a place that serves youth. So, if there's like a Boys and Girls Club or something like that. We know Whitehall and Bexley are the closest ones that are in the process of doing a proximity tobacco retail license. Bexley is actually doing a first reading next week to do a comprehensive flavor ban with their tobacco retail license, but they are looking at proximity as well.
One other question I actually have for Chief Spence. Are you able to speak at all to any experiences of the school resource officers, if they're catching this a lot in our schools?
I think they are. It's present in the schools. The schools are equipped with vape detectors in the restrooms, and that's typically where the use is confined to. I mean, I think it's reasonable to assume they're probably using it in the hallways and other places. But yeah, our school resource officers do interact with. It's prohibited against school rules, but a lot of times in the restrooms. And again, I know that most all the schools, at least the middle schools and the high school, are equipped with those detectors, and they, unfortunately, they interact with them a lot. Understand the effort, but a lot of these are online purchases. I mean, they're readily available online. That seems to be where the bulk, at least what we're learning from, the interactions in the schools, they're being purchased online.
Very much like smoke-free and tobacco 21, this won't really work until it's national, but it's leadership here that's needed to drive other cities and states to make these kind of same decisions. But we agree.
And again, the proposed legislation is about point of sale. It's not about possession or use. The tobacco industry spends $8.5 billion a year on marketing, and 95% of that is at point of sale. That's that free product I showed you, right? That free gift with purchase.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Crane and Ms. Turner. Appreciate the presentation, a lot of good statistical detail here. I do have a couple of questions about what would fall under the purview of what Columbus is considering, what Worthington's considering, what Dublin's considering, and then also presumably what's being advocated for in these chambers. We've talked a lot about vaping and smoking. What about smokeless tobacco, chew, dip, anything like that? And there's a lot of flavors that are used in that product. Would that fall under this umbrella as well?
It does.
Okay.
It's a regular Red Man, which is not flavored, would
Right.
not be considered. But a lot of the newer products that you've probably seen, the little lozenges, the other chews that have a lot of flavors in them, they would be removed, just taking the candy out.
Okay. Ms. Angelou, my colleague, at the end of the dais here, had said that she had used menthol products for many years, presumably decades. Again, what's being advocated for in these chambers, would that prohibit, say, somebody that's 40 years old, has been smoking menthols for 20 years, would they no longer be able to purchase that product within city limits? Okay.
And a significant portion of them would stop,
Okay.
and we would save their lives.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you both so much for your time tonight. Excuse me. Thank you both so much for your time tonight. We appreciate your time and the expertise that you've shared with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Section C on the agenda, items from council office. The first thing that we'll address under this section is ordinance number 73-2022, an ordinance to amend the official zoning map of the city of Gahanna. This is related to 348 Granville Street, parcel ID 025-000276, changing it from its current designation of suburban office to community commercial. Ms. Director Blackford.
Good evening, Council. Michael Blackford here. Tonight, with another rezoning for you. On your screen right now is the location and zoning map. They're running right through the center of the property is Granville Street. Just off to the east is Hamilton Road. This property is currently zoned SO, which is suburban office. That is, let's see if I got this. Here it goes. One moment. Here you can see like this teal color gets a little bit washed out on your screen here, but this is the library that's under construction. That is also zoned suburban office. The request is to rezone the property to community commercial. Community commercial is actually the predominant zoning that you see in this area, all the various tans that you see in this area to the west of this property on Granville Street. Pretty much every property on the south side of Granville Street is already zoned community commercial. And then the property just to the east, which has like the Dairy Queen, that is community commercial as well. So here on your screen, we're going to zoom in a little bit on this zoning map. The area in red right here, this is the portion of the property that they would like to rezone. It's just a portion of the property. This is where there's an existing office building to the rear of the site. So north on the map there's some multifamily. That is not part of the rezoning request. Varied mix of uses in this area. Some of those folks, again, is the library. Just to the west, to the east, immediately to the east, there's Dairy Queen. There's also Gahanna Lincoln. You have Firehouse Subs. To the south, you have BP and Donato's. Here's a street view of the property. What you see being rezoned is pretty much where this dark pavement is. Here, again, there's a small two-story office building. If I recall correctly, that office building was built, I believe, in the early 80s. I want to say 1982. So it might be a good time for some reinvestment in this area. Rezoning, again, it's going from suburban office to community commercial. I'll tackle what those differences are. They're very few. The main is uses. It's only 3/10 of an acre. There is no minimum lot size, but when we're dealing with a 3/10 of an acre parcel, there's really not a whole bunch of uses that can go on there because of the need for parking. So it's going to be a fairly modest development if the rezoning is approved. Like we talked about with our last rezoning request a month or so ago, it is just a rezoning. It is not a site. There is an informational site plan, but we don't adopt a specific use. So in this case, they're talking about a coffee shop with a drive-through. If the rezoning is approved, then any of those uses within community commercial could happen on this property. There are future applications. Those applications do require a public hearing. If the rezoning is successful, there would be a final development plan and design review. So that's when we look at site layout, looking at access points, looking at buffers, landscaping, building design, things of that nature. Again, that all comes after the rezoning if it's successful. So again, the main differences between the existing zoning and proposed, it's not height, it's not intensity, it's not setbacks. All of those are identical. It's really uses. That's the only thing different. And suburban office is really a professional office, medical, libraries, and banks are allowed within that zoning. No retail types of uses are allowed, no restaurants. Community commercial does allow for retail and restaurants, and also allows for those same types of office uses. So it'd be more intense uses. Again, it's really the retail and restaurants. That's different between the two zoning categories. Here is their informational site plan. Again, this rectangle right here, this is Dairy Queen. This is the site where there is the existing office building. Again, it's pretty modest size, 3/10 of an acre. Again, small coffee shop with a drive-through, just enough room for a few parking spaces. Again, this is a conceptual site plan. If the rezoning is approved, they might do a coffee shop. They might do some other types of commercial use. Land use plan in this area is mixed use. Mixed use does promote retail and restaurant uses. Again, the current zoning does not allow for that. And encourages rather intense development over 60,000 square feet an acre. It does make recommendations to have a more modern design, which is buildings a little bit closer to the road, parking to the rear. Again, those are things that would be looked at on the next step if the rezoning is successful. 6 different criteria, really small up there to see. Somebody's got a lot of emails there they need to go through and review. Those aren't mine, thankfully. But the rezoning criteria, it talks about compatibility. Again, we looked at the zoning map, and we saw that there was a lot of similarly zoned property in and around that area. Capacity of infrastructure, this is in an area that already has infrastructure in place. It's on a major roadway. There's utilities in that area. It's already developed at a similar types of intensity. Planning staff, we do support this request. We do recommend approval. Again, we find it consistent with the land use plan recommendations of mixed use. It's very similar to the types of uses in and around that area. Again, we looked at some of those uses, whether it was BP, Donato's, Dairy Queen, even farther to the west. All those properties are zoned community commercial. So this would be making it more in line with the existing development in the area. Planning Commission saw this request a couple of weeks ago. They did recommend approval to you all by a 7-0 vote. And with that, I'll be quiet. Happy to answer any questions. Applicants here as well, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any questions or discussion? Mrs. McGregor?
So the office building that's there will be demolished?
It would have to be in order to accommodate any type of retail restaurant type of use. Just the layout and the parking wouldn't work.
So could it be a Valvoline station?
Automotive uses are allowed, but it's allowed by conditional use. And I believe part of the code, I believe the auto uses that are allowed by right are gas stations. It wouldn't be enough size for a gas station. Property isn't physically large enough. But I believe we amended the zoning code to no longer permit those types of uses, as you mentioned, within the community commercial zoning.
Okay, that's why I was just make sure we still have that.
Yep. That was adopted, I think, about a year ago or so. Yes, ma'am.
Because it looks like it would be about the size of.
Any other comments, discussion? All right. Director Blackford, I know where this is going to go, but I'm going to go there anyway. In our land use plan, I'm looking back at how we identified that parcel as desired for mixed use. And I do understand that we say that uses can be integrated vertically, but do not necessarily have to be integrated vertically. We did identify mixed use as distinct from community commercial in the land use plan. And I do note that development character for this particular corridor really intended for, I think, a bit more verticality in what we were looking for. And I understand that the depth of this parcel does have residential in the back, and so that this would be kind of a street facing. I do want to note, particularly since the applicant is here, that the idea of this is to create walkability. It's to create kind of a street side cafe kind of feel. I do understand that we have maybe a different type of character in some of the existing area, but that this was the ideal that was expressed in the land use plan. A bit more verticality, a bit more of what we want to see, not just what exists currently. And so I'll note that and hope that that doesn't land on deaf ears.
Understood. Yep. And again, if the rezoning is successful, that's when we look at those final development plans, trying to incorporate a little bit more walkability in the exterior types of activities that you mentioned to help increase the vibrancy of that area. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Mr. Weaver?
Chair, thank you. Director Blackford, thank you for the presentation. Does there have to be a traffic impact study, or has any thought been given to that? Because I know sometimes with that Dairy Queen entrance there, depending on, well, the season, but the time of the day, and if a coffee shop is one of the possible considerations, a lot of people like their morning coffee. I'm thinking school buses and everything too, so.
So there was a comment made by our engineering team that if the rezoning is successful at final development plan time, they would be looking at more traffic analysis at that point. So on the screen right now is a conceptual site plan. It shows here, I'll say it looks like kind of maybe a new access point or something. I'm not sure exactly what this is, but I believe, again, our engineering folks looked at that and said access, traffic circulation would be evaluated at time of final development plan. So it is reviewed sort of at that next stage. Again, that review gets incorporated into that application, then discussed with Planning Commission at the public hearing for the final development plan. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, Director Blackford, so this would come on for first reading at the next meeting, I believe. Any desire for this to come back to committee, or I guess we can ask that later? None? Okay.
You want to note the public hearing?
Oh, yes, thank you. Do we have a date for a public hearing? Okay, what would that date be?
19th, it's on there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
December 19th.
December 19th. And just one for this item?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the assist. Okay, so this matter will come on for public hearing on December 19th. It would be on for first reading on December 5th. No need to come back on the 12th, and then on for second reading and public hearing on the 19th. All right, thank you, Director Blackford.
Thank you so much.
All right, the second item is the item that we added. Mrs. McGregor wanted to address the potential of a resolution for the Gahanna Lincoln football team.
Well, since it was 40 years since we've been to a state, to Final Four, I just wondered if there was any, if you would want to do a resolution just, in honor of this I know we did a letter of support before the game, but I was just thinking just in honor of their accomplishments for the season. I haven't done anything. I'm just saying it's, if you'd like to, I'd maybe bring it next committee or whatever. I don't know if anybody else thinks it's necessary. I thought it would be nice to do that. That might be another 40 years before, hopefully not, but.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you for suggesting that, and then also volunteering to write it up, so. No, I've also been granted, the mayor, she did text me, and she's gonna have a proclamation to the same effect, so.
Oh, I was going to ask her if she was going to do that. We could maybe do it at the same time.
Yeah, no, it'd be wonderful to do
Okay.
that.
All right, I'll work on it.
Fantastic, thank you. So you do not expect it for December 5th, but maybe for the next committee? Or,
No.
Probably. I don't know that I'll have, I mean, we wouldn't have time to see it ahead of time
Okay.
if we do it, right, on the 5th.
okay, all right, so that,
Of course, I don't think it's going to be real controversial either.
no, exactly. I guess I'll leave it open, and if it's coordinated ahead of time for the 5th, then that's great, but if it's set for later in the month, that's
Okay.
also
All right,
wonderful.
we'll do that.
Okay. All right, Section D, items from the Department of Economic Development. We have one item, ordinance 75-2022, ordinance authorizing the mayor to modify various agreements with Science One relating to the Tech Center Drive extension, waiving second reading and declaring an emergency. And after all that drama,
Tell me about it.
all right, Director Strum, and I believe we also have Mr. B. Hall
Yes,
here
I was
on
going to
behalf
invite
of
Mr.
Science
Behall
One.
up here and watch this handoff. Speaking of football terms, I'll be handing off this presentation to Mr. Ray Malarski.
Thank you.
City Attorney?
Yes, this is basically a legal issue. That's why I'm handling this. Science One, or ADB, Safegate, came to us, and they were having trouble with a cash flow issue, it was my understanding. I have Mr. Behall here to explain the reasons why, although from my perspective, it really doesn't matter why. What we're doing makes the city more secure, so I'm all for it. So what we are doing, in essence, is we are not going to get the SIB loan. So we are no longer going to be liable for a SIB loan, which is good. That's also why we are canceling the note, because as part of the original agreement, the note was to promise to pay us back for the SIB loan. But we don't have to have that because we're not going to get a SIB loan. We have not signed any documents for that. They were on the table when this issue came up, and I told Nate, hey, hold off on those until we find out how we're going to do this. So what we're going to do, in short version, is they've already given us $1.5 million to hold into trust. That was to secure the SIB loan. Now, we're going to instead take that $1.5 million, and we're going to use that money, instead of taking the SIB loan money, we're going to use that money to pay for the construction cost. The thing to keep in mind here is we need to be the general contractor here because there are grants involved, and the city's the one who can get the grants, and so the city has to be the general contractor. We're hiring Science One, and they're doing all the work, but in name, we are the general contractor. That's why we are the ones who are paying putting the bill. The $1.5 million, if you remember, was an overestimate. It's about $200,000 or $300,000 more than we believe the cost, or than what was estimated to be the cost of this Tech Center Drive extension was going to be. However, that also does not take into account the fact that we are going to supply TIF funds and money from the water fund and these grant funds. All that money is still doesn't change at all. It's all exactly the same. We're just saying what pot we're taking the $1.5 million out of. So in effect, it's going to cost at least $600,000 less than the $1.5 million when you take into account the 300-some thousand we're putting in and what the grants are and that kind of money. So, so what this is, you'll see that there's three documents. As I said, the one is the note cancellation. That's just saying we don't need the note anymore if we don't get the SIB loan. The other is the security deposit and the infrastructure agreement. The basic changes in those, as you will see, merely are changing it, saying we're not getting the SIB loan anymore. Instead, we're going to take the money from the security deposit that has already been given to us, and we're going to use that money to pay. It enables us to do this a lot faster because you can just give us a bill, we can just pay it and be done. I think that might be the main reason. However, Mr. Behall is here because it's his client, and he could speak more to that if you guys would have questions on it. But with that said, is there any questions for me on this?
Any discussion, questions from council?
I could give you just a quick background here, as I know you have a lot of items. When this started, of course, ordinarily the construction company would put up a bond, and Mr. Biondi, who, as you know, you might recall, passed away, the president of the company, decided he wanted to go get a letter of credit to back our performance. Letter of credit, of course, isn't cash and would have been fine as a means of bonding the job off. But right before he died, ironically, he decided to just put cash up. So, of course, then he did die before it happened, and his daughter became the president of the company. She's been involved with the company for 25 years, so she's very well acquainted with the operation. So we went ahead, got the cash, put the cash together. Now, in the meantime, the SIB loan had already been put into effect as a strategy for getting the actual cash in case we were using a letter of credit. Well, with the confusion surrounding the death of Mr. Biondi and all of us that are involved in trying to get this deal done so we could get this street done in a timely fashion, and the ADB folks moved into this facility, therefore, in a timely fashion, because they're not really able to move in unless the street is done. It's a cacophony of dominoes here almost that are falling. So now we have the issue of the SIB loan wasn't even quite applied for completely yet. And we've got people who have been working on this job, the actual subcontractors. The work is being done. It's moving along, and there's quite a bit of progress already made on this street. But they have to pay their workers. This is more a matter of efficiency to get these workers paid who have been working, and this contractor who is in good faith done all the work without any cash. He submitted his first request for an advance or draw on the job. It was backed up by an engineer who had to go to the site, see that the work has been done, certify to the city that has been done. And so we were all talking, commiserating, and we said, why are we getting the SIB loan and creating all this back and forth and all of this unnecessary administrative hassle here when the money to do the job is sitting there, the city has it, the city is guaranteed that they're going to be able to pay for this job even if any of the parties failed. And therefore we said, wow, this is could be streamlined and we could get the money faster to the workers. And I think my client is going to probably they have lines of credit, of course, because they're involved in large projects, and probably going to do that because I think they want to pay today or tomorrow. But we certainly would like to get that money flowing for the job, because the job is virtually probably 30 or 75 to 80% complete already, and we need to get money moving to the workers. So that's essentially what happened. And I would say all of the confusion surrounding Mr. Biondi dying and all of us trying to get this thing done in a efficacious and efficient fashion, we were sort of maybe a little blinded by the fact that we could have done this in a more streamlined fashion. That's what we're now saying. Can we do that and change these documents? So we've modified the documents. Both sides have looked at it, edited them, and we're ready to go. But we would certainly request council's approval of this. We think it's a nice remedy for a problem of getting people who are laboring paid quickly and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. B. Hall. And I guess just to clarify and verify and affirm one more time, this is all for the extension of Tech Center Drive, which is a public street.
Yes.
And that's
Yes,
what
that's
we're
correct.
utilizing this all for.
Yes.
Great. All right. If there's no discussion, I know you've asked for a waiver and emergency, so it will be on for council agenda on Monday, December 5th with waiver and emergency. Consent? On the consent agenda. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
right, next up, we have 3 items from the Department of Engineering, Resolution 34-2022, and then ordinances numbers 76 and 77. Yes, Mr. Comlank.
Yes, good evening, Chair Bowers and members of council. I have 3 items, as you had mentioned, before you this evening. The first item is seeking a resolution of necessity for the securing of additional right-of-way and temporary construction easements associated with the upcoming improvements to the Taylor Station Claycraft intersection as we modernize that to a modern roundabout from its signalized intersection operation. It's customary that as we proceed forward with right-of-way acquisition and the negotiation with the subject property owners, that we have a resolution of necessity in place before negotiating with the property owners. I'll seek any questions, clarifications from council.
Thank you, Director. Any questions or discussion? All right. That item can go on consent. All right. Thank you.
And the next 2 items are in association with the last presentation as it relates to the Tech Center Drive extension. We have utilities within the corridor, and these are the easements associated with the extension of those public improvements.
All right. Any questions or discussion?
So this is where the road's actually going to go on these
Correct.
properties? Okay.
Yes. And just for advanced notification, we are working on another easement for sidewalk purposes in affiliation with the improvements as well. The writing of the deed of easement is in process and being reviewed, and we'll be bringing that forward at a future committee.
Thank you.
So for ordinance 76, just on for first reading, no need to come back. Consent for second and adoption?
Yep.
All right. And ordinance 77? Same. Oh, you've asked for a waiver and emergency on ordinance 77?
And that, because that is on the Science One property and tied with their timelines, the first one was on Value Recovery Group's, an adjacent property to the north.
Okay. So then just on consent with waiver and emergency on the December 5th meeting? Yes? Good? All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
All right, I think with that, we conclude our tonight's Committee of the Whole. Thank you.
Do we need a break, or can we power through? Power through?
That's good.
Let's go.
Good to go, Jeremy?
We're good to go.
Let's kick off Finance Committee for November 28th, 2022. Just have one item on the agenda. Again, the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget. Very briefly, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Of course, Mayor's not present today. I believe she's feeling a bit under the weather, but I was informed that Miranda, you were going to lead the presentation. So just want to, so no comments obviously from the mayor. I don't know if the administration has anything they want to mention for the record before diving right into the the prepared presentation. Okay. Miranda, you have the floor whenever you're ready. And I guess while we're waiting, I'll just add, anybody that might be viewing at home or anybody in council chambers that wasn't here for the last Finance Committee discussion, we've been submitting questions to the administration in advance so that they can come back with more complete answers to make the best use of our time here in chambers. A couple of the questions dealt with staffing, and they were sort of intertwined and connected. And so the ask from the administration was that they could come back with a broader presentation as opposed to taking them piecemeal. So nonetheless, that's what we hope to accomplish here today. So with that, Director Vollmer.
Great, thank you. Sorry for that delay. I'm here today on behalf of Mayor Jadwin and the administration to give a presentation on the 2023 staffing recommendations and request. Ms. Angelou, I do have your org charts you requested, and I will get those to you this week. In this presentation, the goal is to answer from November 14th questions, the general government questions 1 and 2, and from 11/21, the HR questions 2 and 3. This presentation will include organizational charts that are found in the budget book. Items marked in yellow are 2023 new positions that are being requested. Items marked in green are 2023 reclassifications, and then items marked in blue are existing. So for this presentation, I'm first going to go over the city org structure, which can be found on page 10. After the staffing presentation, we'll talk about the budget impact questions that were asked a couple weeks ago. And then Director Farrell has some follow-up on the street tree program questions from last week as well. So on page 10 is the proposed city organizational structure, which you can see adds the 2 new senior directors, the senior deputy directors, and then aligns all 8 departments underneath those positions. So first I'm going to start off with public safety. That the chief of police and his division report directly to the director of public safety. So I know this is hard to see, but it's on page 87. The recommendation and request for 2023 is to add a mental health clinician that would be paid for out of the public safety fund with an anticipated charge back for services with Mifflin Township. And feel free to ask any questions as we're going along. Positions that we've already talked about to some extent, I'll just go over. But are there any questions for the chief or I and the mental health clinician?
Anything from council on that particular item?
Is there anything from Mifflin Township?
The last update I had was their budget process is still working through. Again, as I said when it was first brought up, if the township does not wish to cost share in that position, then we would just come back. We would have a presentation in front of council and see if a supplemental appropriation for the full salary amount was warranted.
Thank you.
Please continue.
The next department I'd like to speak about is engineering, which can be found on page 108. This department so first we're going to cover the operations side. So you'll see at the next following slides for the operational departments, the Senior Director of Operational Services, followed by the Senior Deputy Director. Those will be in yellow throughout the presentation, as those are 2023 additions being requested. So largely the Department of Engineering is reclassification of job titles, not pay grades, just job titles. When Director Komlik started, he reviewed his staffing levels and what was currently here with vacancies that had occurred in his department. He realigned that department. So you'll see in green there, the Senior Civil Engineer, Transportation and Mobility. That is just a rename from the Assistant City Engineer. The Project Administrator 1, that was formerly the Development Engineer. So this Project Administrator, due to the increased workload from engineering, from the dedicated funding for capital improvements, and the increased economic development in Gahanna, this position will allow for a single point of contact for developers and permitting, and will assist with a wide range of engineering projects, not just focus on development as that comes and goes. In addition, the Project Administrator 1 was, at the beginning of this year, was reclassified to a supervisor position to supervise those project inspectors. So this is a title change to Project Administrator 2 to reflect the difference in those 2 positions. The next, you keep going?
Yeah, I'm just seeing if anybody has their hands up regarding the Department of Engineering staffing. Anything from council there? Please continue.
The next department is the Department of Public Service, which can be found on page 96. So there are a couple changes here. The first you'll see, again, are those director and the deputy director, and then a maintenance worker under the streets division there. So that funding is 25% from the street fund and 75% from the enterprise funds. This position will replace 2 part-time team members and seasonals that have been budgeted in previous years, as those we have been unable to fill those. And this will be at a cost savings of over $67,000 to the city. In addition, some other updates to public service. The electrician position was removed due to it being vacant since it was being added to the budget, and workforce issues with recruiting for that. In February of 2022, through a supplemental appropriation, the utility supervisor was added. That employee started in October of 2022. And then the operations manager, which was vacated in 2022, was removed from the 2023 request. That position was removed, and so we can continue to review staffing to ensure that existing employees are being utilized appropriately. And then once a new director gets onboarded, should that position need to be added back or reimagined into something else, there could be a request for a supplemental that is possible in 2023 as we look to onboard that new director, which we hope will begin at in January of next year.
Ms. McGregor?
Does that say maintenance worker? Is that with the yellow box at the bottom?
Yes.
Because our chart looks a little different.
It's completely different.
So I just want to make sure.
And it's 98, not 96.
Yeah, our pages are off too from what yours are. So I think that it's just that the maintenance worker is in a different position than it is on that.
Yeah, it's beside of it an hour or up there.
Okay.
Yes, it's like a little box right here.
I had to stretch the org charts out so you could maybe see them on the screen, so that might be some of the differences too. But let me look.
Yeah, it looks like the line still rolls up under the streets foreman on page 98. The position's listed, the layout's just slightly different.
Oh, yeah, it's just because of the spacing on the PowerPoint slide. So all those positions report up to the streets and utilities supervisor. That he has direct oversight for all of those positions on all of those downlines, except for the utility supervisor is the direct supervisor of the utility foreman and those equipment operators. The streets foreman, equipment operators, and maintenance worker report directly to the superintendent.
Ms. McGregor, was that the gist of your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything further from council on organizational chart for the Department of Public Service, or just staffing in general for public service?
Can I ask, back to engineering for just a second, do we have an engineer that kind of looks at water, like, there used to be a water resources engineer?
Yep, it was retitled to Senior Civil Engineer for Utilities. Jim Turner was rehired in October, I believe.
Okay, all right.
What's that, Mrs. Angela?
Never mind.
You found it? Okay. Anything further from council before we move on?
Yep.
Okay.
Next up is the Department of Planning. This year, we had a vacancy in the Planning and Zoning Administrator. Director Blackford and I tried for many attempts to hire a Planning and Zoning Administrator, and were unsuccessful, so we changed that position to a Management Analyst for Planning. That person operates as a planner, assisting Director Blackford with plan review and getting her feet underneath of her, and getting some additional training as well. So that was a change. Planning and Zoning Administrator was a C18, and that was changed to a C13 to that planner position.
Anything from council on planning? All right. Director Vollmer, all yours.
So the next department we're going to talk about is Parks and Recreation. Due to the size of that department, I've split it into Recreation, and the next slide is Parks. So we're going to talk about Recreation first. There are one new request and one reclassification request. So the new request is for a part-time Recreation Coordinator 1 for aquatics, with funding coming out of the Parks and Rec Special Fund. The Aquatics Division requires months and months of preparation to prepare an adequate training and implementation for that large operation. So this additional part-time, year-round position will assist in the preparation and coordination of the large seasonal staff that is onboarded for the summer. The next request for recreation is the Green Recreation Supervisor. That position is currently held by Recreation Coordinator 2. It's a request to reclassify that position into a supervisor. The funding for that is again out of the Parks and Rec Special Fund. This position is responsible for community events and activities. They also manage the seasonal staff for events and paddle boats.
Is that the one that's recreation supervisor events? I mean, it's not green here. Is that what it says? I
Yeah.
can't see it.
Oh, yeah. It says Recreation Supervisor Events. So
Events,
that's
okay.
what the Rec Coordinator 2 would be is being requested to be reclassified into a supervisor.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was putting the right.
Yeah, sorry, some of these are hard to see up there.
Well, did anybody else's buy-up live feed go down? I'm
Yeah.
just, so yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as
Do
you.
we have a
having
number to get into that, Chambers?
I think it's 1524, but my screen just doesn't show the presentation anymore. We don't need to hold you up for that, Miranda, if you want to continue.
Okay. Were there any questions for recreation?
Anything from council on the one half of Parks and Rec?
What's the yellow one?
The yellow one is a part-time Recreation Coordinator 1 to work under the Aquatics Supervisor.
That's yellow.
Please continue, Miranda.
So the other half of Parks and Recreation is the Parks Department. This one is very small. So the yellow box midway down is a Supervisor of Forestry. We talked about that at the last meeting. That request is being made after the job audit was conducted due to the work being performed at a supervisory level. So we would be adding a Supervisor of Forestry, and then that's the new position. The Forestry Foreman will remain as well.
Anything from council?
Yeah, just a quick question. Is that horticulturist position currently filled or is that vacant?
It's currently filled.
Okay.
Anything further from council before we move on? Nope. Okay.
So that is the end of the operations side. So now we'll switch to the administrative side. Up first, we have the Department of Finance. So the Senior Director of Administrative Services is a reclassification in green. And again, the Senior Deputy Director is in yellow as it's an ad. So these positions are the finance analyst positions that I'll discuss are funded out of the general fund. The green one is a request to reclassify a current administrative coordinator and reclassify that position as a finance analyst. So this person can perform a higher level of tasks related to accounts payable, financial reconciliations, financial reporting, and data analysis. And then the new ad, the yellow finance analyst, is to oversee our procurement policy that was adopted by council during 2022. And then streamline procurement by assisting other departments with procurement issues such as pricing and shipping.
Okay, on our thing, it says finance analyst 3, and we have one, so which one is that? Is that the one that's green?
It just means there's 3 of them.
Yeah, I know, where are they?
It's just broken down on this one.
We just don't have them all.
No, we currently have one finance analyst
So
and
we're having-
one administrative coordinator. And so the request is to add one finance analyst and reclassify a current employee to a finance analyst. So there'd be a total, so there's a net add of 1
Okay,
in the Department of
I
Finance.
just wasn't sure.
That threw me off too at first.
So just to clarify, Karen, on the chart on the presentation, green is a reclassification and yellow is a new ad, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And that's why I'm putting G's and Y's there.
sounds good. Anything further from council with regard to finance department? All right, Director Vollmer.
The next department is Human Resources. The request under Human Resources is to add a Risk Management and Safety Administrator out of the general fund. This position will report directly to the Senior Deputy Director to reestablish and update the city's safety programs and policies, establish and manage a comprehensive safety training program for city employees. And in addition, one of the large parts of this job will be maintaining the city's risk insurance program. As Mr. Crawford left the city, the risk management and property and liability insurance fell under public service. It's being realigned under the administrative services. And so that involves a large amount of work to ensure that our risk program and our insurance is to the best it can be to protect the city.
Anything from council on HR? All right, Director Vollmer, please continue.
The next department is IT, Information Technology. This has a request for 2 additional positions. One is the asset administrator. That would be funded 30% out of the Parks and Rec Special Fund, 30% out of the Public Service Special Fund, and 40% out of the General Fund. This position would be the technical expert to the CityWorks asset management application as it's being utilized by Public Service, Engineering, and Parks and Recreation. It would ensure continuity across the platform, implement requested changes, provide technical support and training while following best management practices. Additional tasks would be managing database records, including users, equipment, labor rates, materials, supplies, adjusting individual service requests, and this position would also assist the GIS administrator with the asset management program. The second request is for a CAD administrator. The funding is 25% out of the general fund and 75% out of the public safety special fund. This would serve as a technical expert to the computer-aided dispatch, or the CAD, and records management system, the RMS application utilized by the Division of Police. As we discussed before, the city and the division will be implementing a new CAD system in 2023, and funding for that is in the budget. So this position will be a critical part of the implementation. If you'll remember back a few years ago as well, Chief Spence requested a technical services analyst that was approved by council. It just never panned out during the hiring process, and then the pandemic hit, so it was removed from the budget at that point. So this is a similar position, just with a different title in IT to support the Division of Police and all the technology that they have to do their operations.
Anything from council on information technology? Director Vollmer?
One quick question, I guess.
Yep, Ms. Bowers.
Will records still be housed within public safety, or is that going to fall in this somehow?
When we use the term records management system, that's how we generate all of our reporting. CAD is the dispatching side, but the field-based reporting, crash reporting, incident reporting, offense reporting, aggregating all of that data, that's housed in our records management system. It's really not the same as a records person, someone that's fulfilling public records requests, if that makes sense.
Does the staffing position that is fulfilling public records requests, is that staying within public safety and GPD, or is that
Are you speaking specifically to the CAD administrator, or?
just in general in the department? No, not, I guess just generally.
There's a current employee
Yep,
who
we have a
fulfills
records
records.
Yeah, we have a records clerk.
Right, and so that'll stay
Yes.
within, I guess that's my question. That'll
Yes.
stay housed within GPD?
Yes.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Anything additional from council on IT staffing? All right, Director Vollmer?
And the next department is Mayor's Court. Didn't want to leave anyone out here. There are no requested changes to Mayor's Court. It's just the reporting structure, showing the reporting structure up to the Senior Director of Administrative Services. The next department is Economic Development. The green position, the Economic Development Administrator position, this was a reclassification we reclassified a manager at a C20 to an administrator level at a C17. This position is currently vacant and posted for applications right now.
Is,
Yeah, Ms. Bowers?
yes, thank you. Is that reclassification expected to, why is that reclassification being recommended?
That was recommended after reviewing best practices in the Central Ohio area. Many other economic development departments of this size have an economic development administrator as well. And so that was one of the reasons to do that. And then after discussions with Director Strum and how his department operates, it made more sense to have both of those positions reporting directly to him, and then instead of having a manager and somebody reporting there, because of the functions of those two different positions.
Will that reclassification create any difficulty in filling that position? And are both of those positions are vacant currently, correct?
Correct, they're both posted.
And do you think that the classification from C20 down to C17 is going to make it harder to fill?
I don't think so. I think the job market, labor market is tight for all positions, but it is posted. I haven't had a chance to look to see how many people have applied or yet.
Which one, both of the positions? Or?
Correct. They were posted right before Thanksgiving.
Anything further from council with regard to economic development staffing? All right, Director Vollmer, please continue.
And so those departments all wrap up into the requested reorganization in the mayor's office. So this depicts the information, I think it's page 57, but maybe I'm a couple pages off. So you'll see in the green, that's the Senior Director of Administrative Services reclassification. And then the 3 additional in yellow, the Senior Director of Operations, Senior Deputy Director, and then the Risk Management and Safety Administrator reporting directly to the Senior Deputy Director.
That's really different from what we have on our book.
The Risk Management and Safety Administrator shows in the book reporting to the HR manager, but after additional information about the risk management, property and liability insurance came to light recently, it was decided that it should report directly, have direct reporting lines to the Senior Deputy Director up to the Senior Director, because that position will service citywide items, not just HR items.
Anything from council with regard to the mayor's office staffing?
And just one, the funding for the Senior Director of Administrative Services is 25% split between HR, Finance, IT, and the Mayor's Office. That's the same for the Senior Deputy Director. The Senior Director of Operations split is 20% from Parks and Recreation, Public Service, Planning, the Public Service Special Revenue Fund where engineering is funded out of, and then the Mayor's Office.
Director Vollmer, can you repeat the senior DAS? You said that those were, it sounded like those were funded by departments, not necessarily funds. Is that correct?
Correct. It's all general fund. It's just split between those 4.
Just want to make sure I heard correctly.
Yes.
Anything from council with regard to mayor's office staffing?
So the risk management is a new one on the,
It's not in our book.
it's not on our book.
It's
so-
in your book under the HR department on page 65.
It's not on page
I know, no,
57.
so we can put a little yellow box there and put that in there.
It doesn't show on our page 57 like yours does up there.
Yeah, Nancy, what she's saying is, I think she acknowledges that it's an edit that's been made organizationally, moving it from HR to the mayor's office.
Correct.
Would it be possible to have a PDF file of this presentation sent to us afterwards?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Renner.
I was just going to ask the same thing, if Jeremy could actually take that and do the 3-hole punch, and so we could put it in our budget book, in the appropriate locations.
Or do we have those, like, is there a way to get one for the entire organization? Like, I don't mean every single, like, lifeguard or anything like that, but
Yeah.
something that would be comprehensive. You know, obviously, we're taking this kind of piecemeal by
Yeah, how
by
big,
department.
do you care how big it is? Because, yeah, I can have GIS Joe print it on the plot printer.
I don't
do
know.
need some new wall art, so.
It would be rather large. We've tried to print it on like the legal size paper and
Won't do it.
it won't fit.
If it's in a PDF file, I personally can make it work, but does anybody from council need to see the physical printout?
No,
Absolutely
PDF,
not.
I think would be
PDF
perfect.
would
We
be
can
alright.
zoom in and see what we need to do.
It will, they're all separate, so it'll take me the rest of the week, but
Okay,
we
that's
can get
fine.
it to you.
That's fine. Thank you.
If we want a budget. You can always say no.
Director Volmer, is that the extent of the organizational piece, or do you have more?
That is all I have. If anybody has any additional questions about anything I covered, but the next part I have is to talk about the budget impact, which I believe was questions from a couple weeks ago.
So we'll pause, and I'll just ask one last time to council, just anything regarding the structure, the organizational layout that was just covered thus far. Yep, Ms. Badova.
Thank you. I asked this question a couple weeks ago, and I think I wasn't very clear in asking it, or I didn't understand the answer correctly. The senior deputy director, are all of these departments reporting up to the senior deputy director, and then they are going to report to the director of operational services and administrative services, or are they essentially on the same level as engineering, public service, planning, finance, human resources?
The senior deputy director's direct reporting line is to the senior director of administrative services. The departments report directly to those senior directors.
Okay.
So the senior deputy director's only direct report is the risk management and safety administrator.
Okay, thank you. I was a little bit confused when I saw it in all of the other departments, but I guess it would be because they would be interacting with all of those other departments as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Fire away. Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director. I guess my question is on general staffing. Since council passed the salary ordinance, have you gotten a sense in terms of recruitment or attraction and retention? Are we where we need to be? Is
Yes.
it helping?
Yeah, I think it is helping. We issued memos after council passed the new comp plan that gave employees detailed what they were moving to be realigned in the STEP program, and then also indicated to them the amount of their new wage next year on their anniversary date that they would get from their STEP. And so that was October. The resignations have slowed dramatically since that time.
Staunch to bleeding.
And then for current recruitment, some of the current positions we have vacated are difficult to fill positions in general. For example, we have a systems administrator position open in IT. Those are always hard to fill positions in the public sector just because of the amount of money the private sector pays for someone who's a systems administrator. But the other positions that have come open so far, we haven't had any trouble filling. Our line level employees, our maintenance workers, those types of jobs. We run civil service tests for those. We always have at least 20, 30 people out for those and have a continual list of those as well. And then the part of the salary ordinances and comp plan too, it enabled us to hire hire back Jim Turner with that new comp plan, the planner, and then it enabled us to fully staff our recreation department, which hadn't been done in a little while.
I take care of your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to underscore your comment about the labor market being tight, I think I read an article earlier today. Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester was saying that in her conversations with businesses in her district, that despite, I'll say, a consensus that the economy may be leaning toward recession, a lot of the businesses have reported to her that they intended to hold on to their employees because they envisioned them being so hard to get back. So that's quite an interesting development vis-a-vis past recessions, where obviously unemployment is sort of a signature hallmark of how you identify one. So weird times that we're living in. Anything else from council with regard to the city org structure? All right. Director Volmer, feel free to dive right into the budget impacts.
Okay, I'm going to do my best, but Director Burry's here as well. This is the Excel sheet. Yeah. And then I had handouts. Did everybody get one of those? Small. Yeah, get your magnifying glass out. I'll just start at the top. So you can see across the top it has the different funds, and then it follows down there. So the first line there are the new unclassified positions. So that includes the, they were green. No, they were not green. They were yellow on the org charts. But that does not include the deputy director or the senior director of operations. Those are detailed later in the new org, because I think the question asked, well, there was a follow-up question asking for the cost for those 3 positions. So this is the new unclassified positions. So you'll see in the first line there, the 247,102, that is salary. And then underneath it, the 151,821 is total fringe, and that does include insurance. And so across the top of that line, you'll see the totals for the general fund, public service fund, public safety fund, and parks and recreation fund. And I do have a slide with a total on that we can bounce to at the end as well. Underneath there, you'll see the 2022 communications technician ad. That position was approved in this year's budget. However, due to some budget changes at the last minute, it was actually missed in the appropriation ordinance. We never came back to ask for a supplemental because we've been struggling to hire communications technicians this year, and so we actually hadn't needed the funding. We did just have 2 individuals accept conditional offers for those jobs, though. So this is just something that was missed in this year's appropriation. The next one, where it says new org, the 214,910 is salaries. The total fringe is 36,235. The rest of the fringes on this page do not include insurance. It's listed at the bottom once we get down there for the total, so you can see the total net for the general fund. And then you'll see the senior director of operations is split 20%. So it's split the public service fund, of which engineering is funded out of. That's the information there for that as well. The next couple lines are our union contracts and the negotiated increases there. So the first one, the FOP OLC, is our communications technicians that run our dispatch room. So the 87,642 is salary, and fringe is underneath. The following you'll see is the FOP contract, which is our police officers, sergeants, and lieutenants. And then you'll also see under the public safety fund an amount over there as well, as our some of our SROs and community liaison officer are funded out of there. The next line is the United Steelworkers new contract. We are currently negotiating their contract, so this is an estimate. And you'll see money out of the general fund and the Parks and Rec Fund. The impact to the general fund is lower on these positions, as the ones that are in public service are paid out of those enterprise funds primarily. So that is an estimate that could go higher or lower depending on contract negotiations. The next line is says UNC, that's unclassified, the new comp program that we just discussed. So there's money there in the general fund for that, as well as the Parks and Recreation Fund. The next line is unclassified, the unclassified employees reclassifications that I talked about. So those were in green. And what's included in there is the administrative coordinator in finance reclassified to a finance analyst. That's going from a 12 to a 13. The reason there's a reduction is because the marketing manager was at a C19. That was reclassified to a marketing specialist at a C13, and that employee was hired earlier this year. And then again, the economic development manager from a 20 down to an economic development administrator at a 17. So that's net savings to the city. And then the next lines Our net change to uniform allowance due to rising costs. The net insurance change, that's insurance for all of the ones we just talked about, excluding the new unclassified positions, because those are new and vacant. We automatically budget for family insurance for that, so that can change depending on what selected coverage somebody picks. So that's the insurance change for the rest of the city population. And then the net miscellaneous salary changes and fringe changes, those reductions are due to attrition, other 2022 changes, or allocation changes for employees. And that would carry across all three or all four funds as well. And then there is a line on there for police pension, FOP net, as we're required to put in per state code.
That the extent of the budget impact?
Yes, I do have the totals. Kevin, if you could flip back to the PowerPoint. So this first slide is the total for the new unclassified positions. So you'll see what I could do. What I did is I added the general public safety fund, Parks and Rec, and public service all together. So if you total it up across the sheet I handed out, it's the 785,587 is total across all funds, and these positions do include insurance. So you'll see the total fringe includes insurance for this breakdown.
So that's everything new?
Correct.
So going back to the org chart portion of the presentation, that was everything that was in yellow adds up to 785 and change?
Minus the senior director of operations and the senior deputy director.
Okay.
There was a question asking for the detailed breakdown of that, and that's on the next slide. The organizational changes. So there's the general fund ones that we discussed, and then the 20% for public service in the total there. This does not include insurance in the fringe.
And it's not on here.
Anything from council on what was just presented there?
The last two, are we going to have something on a paper for that?
For these two slides, they'll be PDF'd when I PDF my PowerPoint.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I see your hand go up. Ms. Bowers?
Thank you. The organizational changes that we see here on this slide, the net, so these are net changes, correct?
Correct. So it includes the two new positions, the senior director of operations and the senior deputy director, and then the salary change for the senior director of administrative services, because that's technically a reclassification into a different pay grade.
So how, okay. So the IT manager will be backfilled, though. That position remains.
Correct.
And the director of administrative services would not be backfilled, because that would become the senior director of administrative services.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the finance manager would be backfilled as well.
So the total of the three positions, that's the net change. That's not the total of the three positions, though.
Correct.
Okay.
Including benefits, right?
Everything but insurance.
Does not include insurance.
And why is that?
Because they already have coverage.
Okay.
But we're
So the new
backfilling.
positions, as far as where I captured the insurance costs, was with the backfill. For the IT manager, backfill, the finance manager, those are where the insurance change is actually captured, because these are existing employees, so they
Okay.
change unless they would change coverage.
Sure. Okay.
So the insurance would be captured on the net new. All right.
And that total will fluctuate based on, we have 4 tiers of insurance based on whoever the new employee, what tier they select.
And the senior directors, did I read that correctly, that they'd be at a C24?
Yes. Let me just make sure. One second, I can confirm because it's,
Director Burry, while Miranda's working on that, I've noticed that in the general fund category, the $1,797,000 obviously ties out to page 49 in the budget book. Can you help me to understand the approximately $100,000 that is shown as a reduction under net miscellaneous salary changes and net miscellaneous fringe changes? And I know Miranda touched on it very briefly. I'm just trying to figure out how we make the math work there with the reductions.
and the senior directors are pay grade 26. The senior deputy director is a 25, and current directors are 24.
So are you referring
So
on,
this first column, down towards the bottom, there's net miscellaneous salary changes and
Right.
net miscellaneous fringe changes that approximate about 100,000. I'm just curious what might be lumped in those categories.
right, so what I was able to do was isolate who the new positions were. I was able to isolate the union contract changes, the unclassified changes. What I wasn't able to narrow down to individual items were things that have occurred since the 2022 budget was passed. So we had some attrition. So we had some employees leave that were higher paid that have now come in, new positions, they're being paid less potentially than what those counterparts are that had left the city. We also had some allocation changes. And then we also changed some positions where, as Miranda had mentioned, that we were trying to hire maybe a higher level position, but then determined that we weren't having any success, so backing those down a little bit. So it was basically just capturing what I could and know, and then these were the final pieces that are just due to changes that occurred since the budget was originally passed in 2022 to what we're dealing with now. Because what I'm reconciling to is the amended or revised budget, not the original budget. So isolating what I could and then chalking up the rest to people who have left, changes in who we were going to hire, and allocation changes.
Okay. So I know that's a lot of information. I'm sure I'm probably not the only one that's going to need to look at it a few more times to fully digest it, but while we're here, anything from council on the budget impacts? No? So I did not receive any additional questions between our last meeting and today. So the only thing that's really on our agenda for discussion tonight is the staffing presentation. So before we close out the meeting, is anything on the top of mind anybody wants to ask the administration pertaining to what's been presented tonight? Okay, hearing none. I assume we'll come back December 5th. Obviously, it's a regular meeting night. We'll just tack on, Jeremy will tack on a finance committee on the back end of that. Standard operating procedures, if you get your questions to me, if I have it in my inbox when I log in Thursday morning, I'll make sure I get them to the administration by noon.
We also are prepared to answer the questions on the street tree program tonight if you would like, or we can do it next. Okay.
No, that works.
You almost got away. You're so close. Thanks for the opportunity to bring this up again. Wanted to create a visual to better articulate my response, or my first try at a response last week. The street tree program is something that is clearly beneficial, but it is something that is going to take time and quite a bit of effort in order to implement appropriately. In order for us to do that, we have taken an evaluation of other surrounding agencies, similar size, and also some that maybe have a more robust street tree program. And we've really taken a phased approach to what a fully comprehensive street tree program may look like for the city of Gahanna. I would like to say the phases don't necessarily mean years. So phase one could be 4 years, 5 years, and so on and so forth. It really comes down to making sure that we have a good handle on the inventory of street trees that we currently have before we expand a program that goes beyond what we have the capacity to handle. I'll also state that the costs that are associated with this are an evaluation from 2021. So of course, over time, the expectation is that those have already inflated. But when we have the staffing in place to truly understand what that the workload is, that'll give us a better understanding. But wanted to at least provide an estimation of what we would expect to see with that program. The first phase for 2023 is really getting the staffing structure in place so that we can move forward with some progress with this program. So that's the request with the foreman supervisor, the forestry supervisor, in backfilling with a forestry and arbor foreman, excuse me. Within that first phase, we would take a approach to hazard removals. The only time that we in our common day practice today, we only look at hazards based off of a request. So we're not seeking out those hazards. It is truly by a request or an ask of a resident business owner. So in phase one, we would actually have a planned approach and have to formalize a rating system for our inventory in order to how to manage any removals that would be necessary. Anything with a significant health decline or structural defects would be removed as part of that program. That would, of course, transition into a policy update. So we'd have to manage our current practice and communicate that with our residents as well. Again, from a staffing standpoint, that forestry supervisor and then a maintenance coordinator. The goal there is to provide not only the supervisory expectation of pushing this project forward. As we have today, we have working foremen. So they're truly in the field. So to have time to manage a $120,000 contract isn't necessarily something that we have the capacity to do with our current staffing structure. That maintenance coordinator is an individual who has certain skill sets. Arbor does need the skills for running equipment and just really the evaluation of tree health. So we would need to have individuals who have that skill set, and that's not necessarily easy to find. The statement from Councilman Schnutzer about the challenging with hiring when you're trying to find those qualified staff members who have a specific skill set, it may be even more challenging. So that is another reason why taking a phased approach is advantageous for us. Happy to go through those following phases, but again, those are outlined on your visual to move us towards a fully comprehensive, which would be removals, maintenance, and then replanting to make sure that we have a handle and the ability to actually improve our urban canopy overall.
Mr. Weaver?
Mr. Chair, thank you. So, correct me if I'm wrong, we do a lot of what's in phase one already.
We only do hazard removals by request. We do not have a formalized approach to planned removals.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Anything further from council? Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, forgive me if I missed this, but what is are you expecting that we'll be able to roll out phase one in a certain timeline, 2023, 2024? Where are we kind of in this phase rollout?
Really, phase one will take place in 2023 with the approval of staffing. So that would be the inception of moving towards that phase one approach. And the hopes to have a phased or a rating system in place to then request additional funding in 2024 to complete that phase one.
will the staffing that is requested in phase one set you up to start engaging in phase two, like the pruning by cycle or the code changes, or at least developing a plan for that?
Absolutely. Like I said, the plan that we have is based off of evaluation from other like agencies, but that's with having a working foreman and of course our Parks and Facility Superintendent as well. Having a forestry supervisor will provide a dedicated approach to a program of this stature.
And do you think that the staffing levels that are requested in this current budget at the classification levels are both of these positions are classified, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. The forestry supervisor is unclassified.
unclassified. Okay.
That's correct.
And so is there, I guess basically, do you have sufficient projected salaries to fill these positions, is what I'm asking.
I think Director Vollmer might be a better person to respond to that question.
So the forestry supervisor is recommended and requested in the 2023 budget. The maintenance coordinator is not requested.
And was it stricken? Was it?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think was the question if the salary request for the forestry supervisor is adequate to gain that employee. Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay. And then the maintenance coordinator, do we have that on staff currently?
The goal would be, yes, to promote an internal staff member into a position of that. It's an elevated position that would require certain certifications or requirements, but the goal would be to promote an internal candidate.
And that is not in the budget request for 2023. The goal would be to get the forestry supervisor on board because that more than likely will require a backfill of the forestry foreman. And until we can fully implement these staffing changes and add this supervisor, it's important that we establish positions and allow them to be onboarded properly and trained properly before adding new staff underneath of them to start to enhance a program without, to ensure it's successful, we have to let that employee onboarded, have a backfill, and have the job duties separated. Because right now there's one person performing way too many functions and it will be split. And the forestry, if we were to have to backfill a forestry foreman, that requires special skills, as Stephanie was saying. And at this time, we don't know if there's somebody currently on staff that we can promote or not. And so we would have to, that is a civil service position, the foreman position, so we will have to run a civil service test. So we are looking around the April timeframe before a civil service test can be executed and somebody can actually be hired and onboarded.
Well, the foreman is in the phase two, right?
There's a current existing foreman. That's a second foreman in
Okay.
phase two.
So we have a forestry foreman today. So with the addition of a forestry supervisor, we of course would maintain that current foreman. So once phase 3 would be fully implemented, we would end up with 2 forestry foremen underneath that forestry supervisor.
So I think the reason why I'm so interested in this, and I don't want to speak on Councilman Weaver's behalf, but from my perspective, this is, and I know you feel the same way, Director, that this is a really important program to our residents. And being able to roll this out ties in importantly, I think, with our sidewalk program. And if we're not, I just want to make sure that we're putting enough priority in rolling out and implementing this program. It's asked for by our residents, and I think it will work well with our capital program regarding sidewalks too. So I think it's really important to see this program move forward and to see that there's the staffing and the funding behind it to really get it implemented.
And it could be a position where if we're able to onboard new employees quicker than we anticipate, that we could come back and ask for a supplemental for additional staffing or for additional contract costs that's not currently being budgeted. It's very important that as we now have money from issue 12, that we plan appropriately for staffing and allow people time to be onboarded and trained properly before we throw brand new things at them, because that is not a successful model for any city or any business, really.
Right, but as we promote people, I would understand that we would want to make sure that they've got the staff underneath them so that they're not continuing to do the load of 3
Correct,
people,
and by
right?
establishing a forestry supervisor, that will allow the forestry foreman to be back out in the field and maintaining safe operations when
Okay.
doing tree removals.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
it seems to me that there might be like difficulty finding
Oh,
the
sorry,
right
not the
people
chair.
to be able to do all these things, so God bless you all. When it says hazard removals, and you say, I call you and I say, oh, or my tree's not well, do the residents have to pay to have them done?
It is a responsibility of the resident. If we have a situation that, say, a plow truck can't get through a street, we will do those removals, and we typically do not charge that back to the resident. But by code, the city does have the capacity to do so.
Is there some kind of, will there be the possibility of having, this is what you would have to pay if you have this hazard? I mean, I had a tree taken down, it was $900, and that was out without the bottom. So, I mean,
It really depends on the size of the tree, and also depends on the hazard, because clearly it really just depends on what equipment needs to be on site in order to manage it, and of course the safety of what's around it. So it's hard to gauge what exactly that cost could be, but it's not cheap. And again, there's definitely, from the administrative perspective, there's definitely some interest to manage this from the city's perspective, so that we have a good inventory, a good healthy inventory of trees. So that's the main goal.
And it appears that the sidewalk as well is important here, because the trees are lifting the sidewalks up and causing, really, some of them in our area are very difficult to walk.
Right, and that's some of the concern there as well, is there are some tree removals that will happen with the sidewalk because of the hazards that they're creating with the sidewalks. We don't require homeowners, I am really close to this microphone. We do not require homeowners to replace the trees, which will impact our canopy negatively if we don't have a plan for it.
Thank you for that info.
Anything further from council on the street program? Or street tree program? Yep.
Yeah.
Mr. Renner.
Thank you. I sort of want to dovetail over my colleague, Councilwoman Bowers, the importance about this street program. And so let me just ask this. From council's perspective, we shouldn't really get into the weeds about the machinations about what you need to do. What we really want to understand is, do you have the resources, and can we have it done in a timely fashion? That's really, the 7 of us, that's really what we ask.
Sure.
So can you give me a flavor, an idea, what is the timeline that you're projecting? And if we said, you know what, that's not doable, so how much dollars do you need in order to make this work?
For now, the staffing piece is huge. We need the staff in order to manage the program. So that's where, if we get this structure with our facility or forestry supervisor, along with our forestry foreman in place, that will help us have the individuals in order to actually manage the project. Do have a goal to move into phase 2 within the next 3 years. Now, that again, having a cycle of a pruning cycle, those cycles could be 4 to 6 years based on a cycle. It's going to take time. Not to say that a replacement program can't be in place within that 4 to 6 year cycle. But again, that takes the staff and the equipment in order to manage a program of that size. So, of course, we have a goal to get this in place, full phased, as quickly as it can, but also as responsibly, because we don't want to move forward with a fully fledged program that we don't have the ability to maintain and to actually implement what we promised to the residents. So we want to make sure that we have the staffing, the strategy, and the equipment in order to do what we're saying we're going to do.
Okay, and so, and I apologize, I'm just trying to parse in my little tiny brain all the data that you just said. The biggie is dollars and time. So, Director, one more time. Dollars in, or time to get to phase 2 when?
With
just time. Yeah, I'm not dollars right now. I don't want to put you on the hot seat
Okay.
about that. But time. How to get, what's the timeline that you're projecting to get to phase 2?
If we're able to hire the individuals in year 1, we would want to have phase 2 in progress in 3 years.
Okay. I lost ash trees. I'm on a corner lot, and this city did have a program that was some structure. I lost 4 ash trees because of some program that they said that, you know, hey, and everybody in fact, our community on Woodside Green South lost an abundance number of ash trees because they said that they had a program. And now all of a sudden you're telling me that, you know, fast forwarding to, you know, 2022, we don't have a program. We need to redo this program in such way, and I'm not being judgmental.
Right.
But now it's going to take 3 more years for us to develop a program?
The city's never had, the street trees have always been the residents' responsibility. During the ash borer, there was a program that was put in place because of that impact. When the emerald ash borers came into play, the city did provide a program in order to help that impact because it was substantial. And it did have the opportunity for certain HOAs or residences to opt into programs. Some opted out of it and either didn't want, because there was at that particular time treatments that were available to try to save the trees. If you didn't want to try, then that's where the removals happened. So there wasn't a comprehensive street tree program at that place. That was a program to manage the emerald ash borer. So it's understand that's very frustrating, and that's why with the management of a street tree program, we would diversify the species so that we're not losing an entire neighborhood to one particular tree.
So I understand that, but it is just frustrating to hear that it's going to take us yet more time in order to get to some level that residents think that we're already there. I understand the reasonality. I understand, you know, your logic and everything, but you know, if you needed more dollars, then just say that, and then we can deliberate. But I'll be a large proponent and say, well, here, in order to shorten the timeline, you need X dollars, 50% more. Here, have it. But I'm just frustrated.
Sure, and trust me, we want to see this program in full-fledged, but I also want to be realistic, and I want to be, again, responsible and say, sure, we can do this in 2 years, and I honestly don't think that's realistic. Because we don't have a street tree program, it's going to take time in order to manage the inventory that we do have. So before we move past that, we need to get a handle on our current inventory. We honestly, at this particular time, don't necessarily even have a proper count. So in order to, we need to start there. So I think 2 years is realistic. Now, are we going to push and try to move this along as quickly as we can? Absolutely. But again, based off of getting a supervisor in place and trained, getting a foreman in place and trained, that does take time. So just trying to be realistic with the status that we're in. And also understanding that there's other work that needs to be done outside of street trees. So that's on top of the work that we do. So not making excuses, but just trying to be realistic.
And we have more trees than any other subdivision in the whole region. I mean, we are spectacular with that. But it's difficult, and I think finding the people to do it are going to be difficult unless you can find interns and that that are at the universities and that sort of thing that are working on this. This is really a difficult one.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director. And my colleagues, Mr. Renner and Ms. Bowers, are much more eloquent and put things much more succinctly than I generally do. I will just say that generally, when I was out knocking doors last year, that the street tree program was, or the idea of one, was probably a top 5, if not a top 3 issue when I was out knocking doors. So I would love to see this implemented, and I know you would too, to try and get at something that I think Mr. Renner and Ms. Bowers were getting at is, I think you just indicated that it would be about 3 years to be fully implemented if we get the staffing. But at the moment, there's not a plan for the maintenance coordinator role under phase 1 in the coming year. So now we're looking at 4 years in theory?
Not
No.
necessarily.
Okay.
It really comes down to, and what Director Vollmer was stating, is that we wouldn't move forward with that maintenance coordinator until we have the upper tiers in place. So in the event that we do have our forestry supervisor as well as our forestry foreman, I didn't fumble over at that time. I just want to make a note to that. Then we would have the evaluation of looking at that maintenance coordinator. We would not want to hire that individual before having those other 2 individuals in place.
Understood. And would potentially come back for a supplemental of some work. Okay.
If we have the capacity, and obviously if those are filled, which again, the goal would to have those done first.
So one last quick one. Thank you, Director, if I may. Is there a model program out there for a similarly situated community that you're aware of?
There's many. Similarly, again, the city of Dublin has a robust program. Are they similar in nature? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But that's definitely a model program that we are evaluating.
Thank you, Director. Thank you.
Ms. McGregor.
We have a list of approved street trees that maybe don't have the roots that uproot the sidewalks. Do we have a list of trees that fit that criteria?
We have a prohibited tree list. By code, there's also street tree requirements that you have to meet. So based off of the tree lawn, it determines what size of tree should be planted there, and that is in coordination with approval of the city forester. So there is a process in order to plant, and you do have to submit for a right-of-way permit in order to do any work in that right-of-way.
But do we have a list of trees that specifically are okay for, like, you wouldn't want a beech tree, that are appropriate for street trees?
We only have the prohibited, not
so we
the
don't.
preferred, right?
Maybe that we should do that.
That is something that, yes, I think that would be something that would be beneficial.
Because I know that the street adjacent to ours, our next street, they lost all their emerald, due to the emerald ash borer. And somebody in their neighborhood, they went through and got the names of people that wanted to have a street tree. And then they paid so much to have the trees done, and they repopulated their trees on their street on their own.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's not, we don't have to wait for the city to do it. They took it upon themselves to do it.
Yes, that is definitely something that can be done. We don't require it, but it's not to say that it can't be done.
Right, but you're right, the right-of-way is the right-of-way for utilities and stuff. You have to be cautious of that, too.
Right.
So.
And Nancy, I believe that program,
Oh, yeah.
whatever you want to call it, they worked in conjunction with the city.
I'm sure they did, yeah, that's
For the
good.
permitting and.
Oh, that's right, you live on that street.
A bulk buy and all of that stuff, right? So the volume discount, timing of the year, I think they did it in the fall, so that it was a little bit cheaper at the nursery. And then I think it was a Chinese rubber tree or something like that was what they had advised. Anyway, they're doing fine now. Ms. Bowers, you had one more?
Yeah, just a question about this. Looking at the org chart on page 79, so the forestry supervisor would report to the parks superintendent. But does it make sense, since this is such a high priority item for the residents, for there to be a program coordinator specifically for the street tree program? Is that something that could potentially expedite? Because I see things in phase 2 that could be started on now, like code changes. So does that make sense to have kind of more dedicated? This to me is like, this is a key issue 12 program, right? So I just wonder about that.
So with a policy review, that's when we take a look at what needs to come into play for those code changes, because 913 and 914 in our code would have to be completely rewritten, and that's something that we would be prepared to do. So that's why in that phase 1, that policy review also includes that update of that code language as the program is rolling out. So that's not to say that we have to wait in order to make those strides into that accomplishment. But when I'm looking at the evaluation of what that process looks like, it's policy first and then updating that official code.
Yeah, and I think, I use that as an example, but absolutely, that makes sense. I'm just wondering, would the addition of a program, a street tree program coordinator, be of use in implementing the phases?
Looking at with the second foreman into play, the thought process there would be to have basically an arbor team for street trees, an arbor team for parks. Because like I mentioned, there's still work that needs to be done without the street tree program. So with that org chart and that organization, to have those maintenance coordinators along with the forestry foreman and our team members under those that hierarchy, we would have the capacity to manage the street tree program within the under the forestry supervisor.
Has there been any exploration, sorry.
Sorry, go
Has there been any exploration because of the link between this and public service in exploring kind of a collaboration or a shared position?
In some capacity, we with the sidewalk program, we of course work cohesively with the service department in order for our city forester to evaluate trees that along with the sidewalk program. But as far as the street tree program, we would manage that through the Parks and Recreation Department.
Okay.
Ms. Badova.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that I heard you say that the 3-year timeline is to get to phase 2, not phase 3.
That would be, yes.
Okay, so then what is the timeline to then get to phase 3?
It's, again, that's hard to say today. It's easy for me to sit here and say 4 years. That's hard to put a timeline on because, again, we have to get a handle on our inventory first. The goal is to have, this is a priority, and I think that's important to say. This is a priority, and this is something that we want, not only the Parks and Recreation Department, but the administration as a whole want to see this successful, want to see this move forward. But again, want to make sure that we're doing it in an effective way. So again, if we have the staff and the progress in place to get phase 3 done in 3 years, then fantastic. It's hard for me to say we're going to have this fully done in 4 years. That's hard for me to say right now. But it is a priority to put the effort into progressing this program.
So with if you had the resources to do so, the timing isn't going to be necessarily, like, to get to from phase 1 to phase 2, there's some timing issues with getting people hired, getting them trained. There would be some of those issues, but from phase 2 to phase 3, do you see there being a little bit less of those? Like the money would be the bigger issue than the timing?
I would say so. And again, the phases don't associate with years. So it's not to say that phase 2 and 3 couldn't happen in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that moving into phase 2 that's going to be the timing challenge and the staffing challenge around making sure that we have a good handle on that progress. But I would say that phase 3 step, again, that's reintroducing trees into our program. So I would see that being a shorter timeline. Again, the phases weren't meant to be a disappointing response. It really was just to show that a street tree program isn't as easy just to say, we have one now. It is going to take time in order to make sure that it's done the right way. So it wasn't meant to be a dampering topic. It really is. There's a focus there. There is a need there. So that's really the way that we see to move it forward in an effective way.
Yeah, I guess I've been here long enough to recognize that these programs, sometimes they can take time to build up. The sidewalk program that was mentioned before, I think that was first a thought cloud in 2017, and I think we'll actually have construction for the first time in calendar year 2023. Mr. Renner, did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and thank you, Director. You did, while you're creating a street program, and I applaud you, you gave us the details that probably we don't need to really know. Because again, at this level, we need dollars and time. What do you need in order to get this? What's the program? Okay, it's going to put pretty trees. We're going to prune them. We're going to take care of them. Okay, dollars and time. Just simplify it. But I understand, yet I may not like the answer, but I understand. And so thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
I do have a question about details, and it's more just so I can wrap my head around kind of where this is going. What's the vision? So there's been a lot of talk about staffing. There's been a lot of talk about skill sets. There's been talk about equipment. I also see, contract costs explicitly listed on all of these phases. Is the vision, I'm not going to hold you to it, but as we sit here today, that we will have city staff administer a sort of a third party, like a Russell's Tree Service or a Charter Oak or something that would essentially do most of this or all of it? Or is this something that you envision bringing entirely in-house?
It's a combination of both. There will be trees that we will not have the capacity nor we want to have in order to take down. They're too large. It's a liability. So it will be a combination of both. We will be able to manage some of that in-house, but it will also be managing a contract in order to get the work done.
Okay. Thank you. Anything further from council on the street tree program? Yep.
Do they have, as far as workers, people able to do the job, do the vocational schools, Eastland or Fairfield, do they have a program that in like street tree maintenance, or I don't know.
That is a good question. I don't know that, but that would definitely be interesting to learn, and that's why we have our team members in place in order to at least acclimate them into that skill set. In certification for an ISA certified arborist, you have to have so many years of actual on-the-job knowledge before you have the capacity to even sit for a certification. So if we're asking somebody off the street to join our team with that certification, they're going to need some type of skill in order to be able to do so. So that's why we do have that tier with our team members in order to at least have the ability to gain the skills or the time frame that's necessary to progress them into a certified arborist. But that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Director Strum and I are working with the vocational schools in the area to be more present in their classrooms for recruiting efforts and civil service exams, because you can time civil service exams up with when people graduate and with openings as well. So Director Strum and I are working on a program such as that as well.
All right. We've belabored this one quite a bit. Anything for finance? All right, we'll conclude the meeting for November 28th. Again, we'll see everybody back here December 5th. All right, thanks, everyone.